Hello everyone and welcome back to my World of Tanks Xbox 360 guide. Today we are going to be talking about the Tier 5 light tank ELC AMX. This is a French tank. The line that leads to this is the medium tank line, all the way up to the Tier 10 Bat Chat. Let's talk about this tank a little bit. Now this tank has a lot of cons, but it also has a lot of pros. This tank was basically developed to be deployed from airplanes. The French wanted a small, compact tank that could be deployed with soldiers at the time of battle. Out of airplanes to be right there on the battlefield. This is why this tank is so small. It was never actually mass produced, and it never entered service. It was they did build a prototype of the tank, but never actually saw combat, or they never produced it. But it was definitely meant for airborne transport. Now, let's talk about the cons of this tank. Weak armor. You don't have any armor at all on this tank. You have a weak radio on this tank. Most people get this tank and think that they are a typical scout tank. Yes and no. You don't have the radio range to communicate with your tanks to locate positions. Yes, you'll light enemies up on the map, but the problem is that your friendly tanks won't be able to see them because your radio range is so weak. So yes, they're spotted, so basically your friendlies are going to have to get in closer to see them, which then puts them in jeopardy. That's another downfall of this tank. Another downfall of this tank, weak view range for its tier. The other tier 5 light tanks get so much better view range than you do. With 100% crew, now you have to have 100% crew to get this view range. 100% crew, you're going to get 360 meter view range. All the other tier 5 light tanks have so much better view range than you do. All of them. All of the other tier 5 light tanks have pretty close to a 400 meter view range. So those other light tanks are going to be able to spot you. Also, you have the lowest hit points at this tier for a light tank as a tier 5 light tank. All the other light tanks have not too much significantly many hit points, but you have the lowest. The Chaffee, for example, has 500, around 500 hit points. Most of the other tier 5 light tanks have around that. Some of the others have around 600. So you definitely have the weakest hit points. You cannot brawl in this tank, guys. You can't get in the face of other tanks and be able to take other tanks head on. Another downfall of this tank, long aim time, guys. The gun has a really long aim time, which means it's going to be harder for you to aim in on your targets. It's going to be hard for you to snapshot on targets. This tank also has a low rate of fire, guys. You're not going to be able to put out the DPM that other light tanks at this tier can do. this tank plays up to tier 8, so you're going to meet tier 8 tanks in this. So those are all the negatives of this tank. But also there's it's not so much a negative, but it is bad for this tank. The engine is in the front of this tank. That's why I said you don't want to attack tanks head on. Your engine is in the front, which means if you get shot in the front of this tank, your engine's going to get damaged. You're not going to be able to move as fast around the battlefield. So let's talk about the strengths of this tank. This tank has a significantly better traverse speed than most of the other light tanks. By meaning traverse, I mean being able to rotate your hull around. Very good traverse. Very good acceleration on this tank. You can get up to your top speed very, very fast in this tank. This tank is super fast. That is another pro of this tank. This tank is super fast. It can speed around the battlefield. This tank also has the least terrain resistance, which means you're going to go across all kinds of terrain without losing your speed and mobility in this tank. Other light tanks have a problem going across different terrains. This tank does not have a problem with that. Another pro of this tank is it is the smallest tier 5 tank. It is going to be really, really hard to hit this tank. You need to be moving around. If you get spotted, you need to be moving around in this tank. If you stop to shoot in this tank, you're going to get hit. Use your speed, maneuverability, and your size to your advantage in this tank. Another pro of this tank, high camo value. This tank has an excellent camo value rating because it is so small. Another pro of this tank is its fabulous gun. It is a 90mm gun, and it is capable of doing some serious damage to tanks, which is why you have such a low rate of fire, because they wanted to kind of balance this tank. If you had such a high rate of fire, you would be able to annihilate your enemies and destroy the battlefield no problem, really, really fast in this tank. Now, with the pros and cons out of the way of this tank, let's talk about the stats and what you should be expecting when you unlock this tank. Okay, so when you unlock this tank, you're going to have the turret. There's no turret to upgrade. Now for the gun, you're going to start out with the 75mm SA32. Then you'll have the 75mm SA44. But the gun that you want is the tier 6 90mm D915. This is the gun that you want. This is the gun that I have on my tank. Engines. The engine you're going to start out with is the SOFAM D150CV. That's a tier 4 engine. But you will unlock the SOFAM 8 GXB tier 5 engine. The suspension, you'll start out with the tier 4 AMX ELC, and you will unlock the AMX ELC BIS. And for the radio, you're going to start out with a tier 3 radio. It's the ER52. And this is one of the cons that I was talking about. You have a very weak radio. You're only going to get a tier 5 radio. It is the ER53, which is why I said it is going to be hard for you to communicate with your friendlies to tell them where the positions of enemy tanks are. This isn't a true scout tank. It can be played as a true scout tank, but it's not really a true scout tank. I will explain to you what this tank is meant to be here in a little bit. hit points, as I was saying, you get 400 hit points in this tank. The signal range with 100% crew is 360 meters. As you can see, my crew isn't 100% yet, so I don't have that view range. I have been getting spotted a lot in this tank. It has been very difficult for me to spot other enemy tanks in this tank so far. I mean, I do get spots and stuff in this tank, but I am also getting spotted myself. Very weak view range or signal range for this tank. The view range is also pretty horrible at 360 meters. The view range is, I wouldn't say bad, but it's not great. It's average for a light tank at this tier, guys. Let's talk about the speed limit. Speed limit is going to be 65 kilometers per hour. Very fast tank. Very, very fast. And it can hit that speed. And it hits that speed very, very quickly, guys. Now, going backwards, this tank can go 23 kilometers per hour backwards. Not bad. Pretty good. Most heavy tanks can do that. Most medium tanks, you are a little bit faster going backwards than they are. The weight of this tank, very, very light tank. As I said, this is meant to be a deployed airborne tank. The weight is 6.76 tons, and the load limit on this tank is 7.95 tons. Let's talk about the crew that you get in this tank. You only get 2 crew members in this tank, guys. So let's talk about that. Since you only have 2 crew members in this tank, if both crew members die, your tank dies. So say you get hit by artillery, both of them die, your tank is dead, no matter what kind of damage your tank would have taken. But this tank gets a commander, and it gets a driver. That is it. Now your commander acts as your gunner, your radio operator, and your loader. That is why I believe this tank has such a weak view range at its tier and a radio range at its tier. Let's talk about the hull armor. No armor tier 1 tanks can penetrate this tank. Now, I have ricocheted shots in this tank, and my tracks have eaten shots. I think it was just like miraculous bounces. I don't know how I bounce shots in this tank. You should never bounce a shot in this tank, and you should not expect your armor to ricochet a shot in this tank. The whole armor in the front is only 14 millimeters. It does have some sloping, but it ain't gonna matter. Sides is only 12 millimeters, and the rear is 10 millimeters. Turret. Front of the turret, 14 millimeters. Side of the turret is 12 millimeters, and the rear of the turret is 10 millimeters. Now, I believe I ricocheted some of those shots because they hit my gun mantle or my gun. It doesn't really have too much of a gun mantle that you can speak of, but I believe if any tank shoots you in this gun mantle where your gun is, I believe that might be an automatic ricochet in this tank. I think that is maybe how I've ricocheted shots in this tank. Let's talk about the mobility of this tank. The engine power, you're going to get 250 horses. The horsepower to weight ratio is going to be 36.98 horsepower to ton ratio. Excellent horsepower to ratio, guys. You're going to be able to pop out and shoot and get back into cover really fast. The acceleration is so great. The traverse speed on this tank is 38 degrees per second. Very good traverse speed. Your chance of getting set on fire in this tank is about 25%, or 20% chance in the engine. Now, since this tank has such weak armor, any tank who fires a high explosive shell at you is going to seriously wreck your tank, guys. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk about the turret. The turret, you get a 360 meter view range, as I said before. Not great for its tier. The other tier 5 light tanks have such better view range than you do. The turret traverses 44 degrees per second, so the turret moves very quickly. Now, this is another downfall of this tank. This turret does not rotate all the way around, guys. The turret is front mounted, which means you're only going to be able to look this way and this way. This is all you're getting. The turret traverse is 15 degrees on each side. 15 degrees on this side, 15 degrees on this side. So it's about like this. Right where your tracks are. Right here where the other track is. This is what you're going to get out of this turret. The turret does not rotate all the way around, guys. One of the downfalls of this tank. Now, let's talk about the gun. This gun is amazing, guys. Although it does have pretty poor accuracy and pretty poor aim time, this tank puts out some serious damage. Your armor piercing, 240 hit points if a shot penetrates. APCR, 240 hit points. And your high explosive, 320 hit points with an explosive radius of 1.46 meters. Very good. So this tank gets armor piercing composite rigid, and high explosive shells. And this tank does some serious damage to other tanks. Let's talk about the penetration. Your armor piercing rounds are going to do 170 millimeters of penetration. Your armor piercing composite rigid rounds are going to give you 248 millimeters of penetration. And your high explosive is only going to get 45 millimeters of penetration. I would not recommend loading any high explosive rounds. You do want to load AP rounds, and you do want to load in some armor piercing composite rigid rounds, some gold rounds in this tank, because you will meet tier 8 tanks, and some of the tier 8 tanks are more heavily armored, but that's not saying that 170 millimeters will not penetrate. That 170 millimeters is excellent. 170 millimeters can penetrate the sides of all tier 8 tanks and even their rears. As I said before, you don't really want to be facing other tanks head on, so you kind of want to shoot them in the sides and in the butt. Let's talk about the shell price. The shells are very cheap for this tank. 255 silver for your armor piercing, 255 for your high explosive, and your APCR is going to cost you 12 gold, or around 4,800 silver. Very expensive for this tank. As you see, I don't have any armor piercing composite rigid rounds on my tank. I've just been kind of experimenting. I want to I just pretty much unlocked this tank. I want to get good at using the armor piercing rounds first before I go to gold. That's how I typically play my tanks. I usually, once I unlock them, I don't usually load gold, because I think that, in my personal opinion, if you load gold shells into your tank right off the bat, you feel the need to use them all the time, and then you can't rely on just your standard ammunition that you get in a tank. I like to master my tanks by using the armor piercing, by using my standard ammunitions first. Usually once I get about 100% crew, then I load in gold, because I believe that once I get 100% crew, I figured that I should have already been able to master my tank and learn how it plays and what my standard shells can do and where I need to hit particular tanks. With my armor piercing, I want to know what my standard armor piercing rounds are capable of doing. But once I get 100% crew, I will definitely be loading a good amount of armor piercing composite rigid rounds. But if you want to load armor piercing composite rigid rounds right off the bat, since you have 29 rounds, I would go ahead and load. You get 36 rounds, so I would probably load about 15 armor piercing composite rigid rounds in this tank. It does have a low rate of fire, so you don't want too many. Even 10 might be good for this tank. Low rate of fire. Let's talk about the shell speed of your ammo. Your armor piercing rounds are going to travel at 930 meters per second, and your high explosive is also going to travel at 930 meters per second. Your armor piercing composite rigid rounds are going to travel at a distance of 1,163 meters per second. So your APCR is going to hit the target a lot faster, which means you won't have to lead your target as much. Let's talk about the damage per minute in this tank. Very low for its tier. You're only going to be able to put out 1,200 hit points per minute with the armor piercing and armor piercing composite rigid rounds. Now with your high explosive, you'll be able to put out 1,600 hit points per minute. But just keep in mind, those high explosive shells have to penetrate to do that, and so it's capable of doing its 500 average damage, but it's not going to be able to do that because you're only going to get 45 millimeters of penetration. I shouldn't say 500 hit points, 320 hit points damage. The rate of fire, one of the weaknesses of this tank, 5 rounds per minute. Your reload time, very slow reload time, 12-second reload time, and that's with 100% crew and no equipment. Now you can get that reload time down by putting on a gun rammer, getting 100% crew, brothers in arms, and so forth, other skills and perks. Let's talk about the accuracy of this gun. 0.38 meters. Average. It's decent. Decent accuracy. Not bad. Not great. Average. The aim time is horrible on this tank. 2.9 seconds, guys. Very long reload time on this tank. But you can get that reload, or you can get that aim time down. My bad. You can get that aim time down by adding an enhanced gun laying drive. Let's talk about the gun depression and the gun elevation. Only 5 degrees of gun depression. Not any gun depression at all, guys. So you're not going to be able to pop up over a hill and aim down on your enemies. Gun elevation, you're going to get 13 degrees of gun elevation. Alright, you will be able to aim up at your enemies. But as far as gun depression goes, bad gun depression. The ammo capacity in this tank, as you guys saw, is 36 rounds. Now let's talk about the camo values of this tank. Now this is without hiding behind any bushes or any other obstructions. This is just sitting out in the open. Very good camo value ratings, I might add. Camo value while stationary is 20%, and since you are a light tank, you also do not lose that camo value. While in motion, it's also going to be 20%. Now when firing, your camo value is only going to be 4.48%, guys, so You have to be careful when firing at targets. You have to be paying attention to their distance, because when you fire your gun, you're going to give away your position and you're going to get spotted. Now let's talk about the battle performance of this tank. For the average player playing this tank. Now this tank is meant for experienced players. This tank is meant for people who can think on the go and be very creative and innovative in this tank. For the average player, you're only going to hit your target about 54% of the time. Your win rate is going to be about 50% in this tank. The damage dealt per battle for the average player playing this tank is going to be very, very bad. 212 damage dealt for the average player playing in this tank. That's why I said this is a very skilled tank. If you're not skilled, a skilled light tank driver, you're not very innovative or can think on the go, this tank is going to be your worst nightmare. You're only going to do damage. You're going to fire one shot, do damage at 212, and then you're going to die. And your kills per battle for the average player, yeah, you're not even a kill. Not even close to a kill. 0.26, guys. 0.26 for the average player. That's why I said this is a skillful player tank. You have to know how to play your tank, be innovative, be creative in this tank, not be dumb, be smart. Now let's talk about what you can do in this tank and how this tank should be played. Since this tank is so small, you can get into the faces of tanks. Basically what I mean is not so much get in the faces, drive your tank right beside their tank like this, and there's another tank beside you. Put your tank right beside their tank, and their gun is not going to be able to aim down on you and shoot you. And if they try and shoot you, once they fire their gun, back away off the side of their tank and use your hold traverse turn, fire your gun, get right back up next to their tank. But it is all depends on your play style of this tank. Now there are two play styles to play this tank, guys. This tank is not supposed to be played as a typical scout role, although you can, but you're going to have very, very difficult time in getting those spot hits. Yes, you'll spot targets, but it's going to be very, very hard for you to, as I would say, get your enemies to hit the targets because your radio range is so bad. You're not going to be able to communicate with your artillery on enemy locations. This is what makes this tank bad, which if any of you guys have had the ELC AMX and you guys were sitting there getting pissed wondering why the artillery didn't shoot some of the tanks, well, it's probably because your radio couldn't communicate with their radio, and even though you had them spotted on your map, they were not spotted on the artillery map. Your artillery's map, or your other friendlies. So let's talk about the two battle roles that you should play in this tank. First battle role is the attacker role. And now what I mean by attacker, I mean not going kamikaze on enemy tanks. It means supporting tanks and flanking them and shooting them in the sides and in the rear. Basically playing a medium tank role in this tank while being very, very careful, using your speed and mobility to move around the battlefield. Role number 2 is your traditional sniper role, sitting back, supporting the team, just because of this gun. This gun can play the sniper role. Your tank has excellent camo value. That is how I play this tank. I play the sniper role in this tank. I support my tank. I support my friendly tanks from a distance in this tank. So depending on your play style, if you want to be an attacker, play a medium tank role. If you know how to play a medium tank role, play the medium tank role in this tank. Don't play a scout in this tank. It's not going to work out. I've tried playing a scout in this tank already. It doesn't usually work too well. My other friendlies spot the targets before I can spot them, and so forth. Even though I wasn't spotted, I was in great scouting positions. I mean, I have lots of different light tanks. I've played lots of different light tanks, and I know great positions to put my light tanks in, and the positions that I put this light tank in were not working. So if you want to play this as a traditional scout tank, go ahead, but it's going to be a very difficult grind getting up to the next tank if you do that. You want to play medium tank role or a sniper role. So let's talk about the equipment that you should put on this tank when playing the two different types of roles. Okay, so if you're going to play the medium tank role, the supporting role, where you flank and shoot tanks in the side and in the rear, and using your speed and mobility on the battlefield to your advantage, you're going to want what you're going to want is a medium caliber tank gun rammer. You're going to want an enhanced gun laying drive, and you're going to want improved ventilation class 1 if you're going to play a medium tank role, or as I would say, a flanking attacker role, where you kind of play kind of aggressive in this tank. Now, if you want to play a more conservative sniper tank role, this is what you're going to want on your tank. You're going to want a medium caliber tank gun rammer to help with your reload speed. You're going to want coated optics, 10% to view range, and binocular telescope and that's going to increase it to 25% for your view range. Now I'm gonna answer some questions to this. These do not stack on top of each other. So basically what this means, if you are stationary and not moving and your binocular telescope is active, your coated optics are not active. So coated optics and binocular telescope does not give you a 35% view range increase. You're only going to get one or the other. If you are moving, you're going to get the 10%. The coated optics will be in play. You're going to get the 10% while you're moving. You're going to get the 25% while you are stationary. Not both, guys. So this is what you're going to want if you're playing the sniper role. Let's talk about supplies that you need on this tank. As I talked about earlier, for my tank that I use, you're going to want about 15 to 10 armor piercing composite rigid rounds on this tank. You're not going to want to load any high explosive in this tank. You're only going to get 45 millimeters penetration. Now for consumables go, nothing too great, guys. You're only a tier 5 light tank. You only have 400 hit points, so you don't want to go big on this tank. Small repair kit, small first aid kit, fire extinguisher, probably automatic fire extinguisher or a manual fire extinguisher. If you get set on fire, you're pretty much dead anyway in this tank, but I would recommend strong coffee, or even the gasoline would be a great idea in this tank, just to give you a better, even increase your horsepower to weight ratio. This tank could definitely benefit from that. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave you guys with two replays. The first replay is whenever I'm going to show you guys what happens when you're trying to play this tank as a traditional scout tank. It doesn't go too well, as you guys will see. It's not, I mean, it's not bad. I mean, I don't believe I die in the first match that I'm going to show you guys, in the first battle I show you guys, but I just wanted to show you guys what this tank is capable of doing if you're going to try and play a traditional scout tank. And it also includes like kind of an attacker role. But the second one is going to show you guys of this tank based on my playstyle, how I'm playing this. I'm playing it as a traditional sniper scout support role, which is basically what this tank is basically meant for. You are a support sniper tank. So the second battle is going to display that, and during the second battle I'm also going to show you guys it's also how to kind of play like the attacker flanker role. So with that in mind, I will leave you guys to the two replays. I will be commentating on them.
damaged. We've hit them hard. One of our tracks is gone. We can't move. Track fixed.